Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, it's been a while. What are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be chatting about the Trudeau government refusing to surrender the Green Slush Fund documents, with the Speaker seizing the House, foreign diplomats in Canada being briefed on quote-unquote acceptable activity ahead of the next election, Parks Canada turning down fire trucks while Jasper burned, Canadian universities going DEI insane, the UN Pact for the Future drawing concerns over CCP backing, and Harris and Trump lean into the final last few days of the election campaign.
This podcast is brought to you by Higher Health's organ supplements, sourced from 100% grass-fed, grass-finished cattle raised by Canadian regenerative farmers. These supplements are designed to fill the nutrient gaps in our modern diets. Higher Health's, connecting people to real food.
All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got the Trudeau government refuses to surrender Green Slush Fund documents, with the Speaker seizing the House. House of Commons Speaker Greg Fergus ruled that the Trudeau government defied Parliament's authority by withholding key documents related to alleged misconduct with Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, dubbed the Green Slush Fund. The opposition demanded records following revelations that the SDTC leadership funneled $330 million into conflicted projects, and despite a 30-day deadline, the government refused to comply, leading Fergus to declare the Liberals in contempt. He emphasized Parliament's absolute right to access documents, dismissing the Liberal argument that releasing them violated charter rights. The ruling follows a pattern of the Trudeau government resisting transparency. So, why might the Trudeau government resist releasing documents despite a formal parliamentary order?
This is interesting because the House has been locked up for a week now. That's pretty wild. I didn't even know they could do that. So that's kind of new for me. It's 100% clear. How do you look? You can cover up one guy doing something corrupt and shady in one department. You can even throw him under the bus, right? But 330 million, and it's a significant portion of the projects. How do you cover that up? Because you can bury some documents, say it's national security, which is what I imagine they're going to do for a lot of this. They'll say, oh, it's national security. It's kind of your get out of jail free card. But it becomes glaringly obvious that you're corrupt when you do it for dozens of projects that include dozens, if not more, people for $330 million. It's too much to look the other way. And I believe that what they're trying to do is buy a bit of time, because they go, okay, we thought this wasn't going to come up. It is. We're here now. How much time do we need to cover this up? And they're just sort of tying up loose ends to minimize the damage, because this can't fully come out for whatever it is, or the Liberal Party and Trudeau are completely crushed, right? So I think they're just buying some time. And at the end of the day, he's Teflon Don. The guy just seems to squeeze his way out of trouble no matter what he does. I hate to say it, but I don't think this will be any different.
It highlights the RCMP issues as well, with the biased nature of the RCMP, because first, the RCMP conducted an investigation into the SDTC and was like, no, everything's fine. We didn't see anything out of the blue. And then when the Auditor General did her own investigation into it, that's when she was like, oh, actually, there is countless conflict of interests with where these contracts were handed out. And then after that report came out, the RCMP was like, okay, yep, we are launching an investigation. There's something going on here. You're like,
right.
Well, until when it was just in your hands, then you didn't think there was any issue at all. So I think that's definitely a highlighting aspect of this whole story as well. Just that the law enforcement agencies that are supposed to keep law and order in check and within our country are just completely captured at this point.
I agree. But you know what's kind of interesting when you think about it? So I agree, and I think a lot of people in Canada that are paying attention would agree that the RCMP doesn't appear to be doing anything for the people, more so just for the institutions, the government primarily, Liberal government, actually, at this point. It is what it is. I think we've come to accept that. And as bad as that is, I think we all just kind of, I don't know what else to do about it. But they had an opportunity, in a sense, to take this and just keep it under the RCMP umbrella, where they could have actually been like, hey, there's some things here or there. We have to highlight something to sort of scare away the Conservatives or the opposition government. Like, here's our opportunity. Let's throw some people under the bus. But it's almost like they got too brazen. They're like, no problems here. We're fine. But now there's too much in the open. Because I bet if they'd gone, hey, look, we got to nail a couple people for something. You got to kick a couple people out of the caucus, whatever that's going to look like, because this is so bad. If you don't, and this comes back to you, there's no way out. And I'm wondering if they just got too bold. You know what I mean? And we're like, what are they going to do? I just keep getting away with it. You know, obviously that in quotes mentality. Because now they have to do an investigation, and now they got the conservatives up their ass. So I don't see how they get away with this. And it's funny because I see it on both sides, right? The RCMP is doing an investigation. It is going to be under the watchful guise of the conservatives. They're going to be all over them. They've already said there's nothing wrong. So that's kind of its own. Now they have to, because the AG goes, no, we have an issue here, guys. They can't come back empty-handed. And then Trudeau's covering all this up because he's obviously trying to buy himself some time, figure out how he's going to make this work on the back, sort of on the back end or in the background, to do what he's done. And he goes, I'm going to get away with this. Those are two conflicting ideas that I now have. So now I'm like, where does this actually land? Trudeau always gets away with it, but the RCMP can't brush it under the rug at this point. Where does it land? Go.
We'll see. I mean, I like to try to remain hopeful and that we could get to a point. You know, we've said it on this podcast before about how there should be Nuremberg style trials for these kind of things of corruption within government, of just a full open investigation. Interestingly, did you see actually John Rustad, the conservative leader from BC? He recently came under fire for saying that there should be a Nuremberg style trial, and the angry mob came after him, and then he issued apologies afterwards, being like, I shouldn't have ever likened what we have seen throughout the pandemic to what happened in Nazi Germany. And you're like, no, nobody's saying that what happened in the pandemic was equivalent to stuffing people into gas chambers. What we're saying is that you need a level of accountability similar to that afterwards, in a similar process.
Yeah, that's like
to hold these officials to account and to get these individuals out of these positions of power. Like to make it about that is really weird.
And what makes no sense. It's like you're saying, well, the judicial system was used because someone was a mass murderer, but this guy raped somebody, but this person killed 20 people. Well, you're not saying this is as bad. You're using the judicial system for this. Well, this isn't as bad. In my mind, it is. But I mean, you see that dichotomy. You're like, no, just because I'm using the system doesn't mean they're the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is just what needs to be done. This is the process we need to go through, because both of these people need to end in jail. That's it. So yeah, I mean, that's wild.
But who knows? Even too, like, there could be. Again, he seems to be able to squirm his way around everything, like you pointed out. But there is some hope within, like, even it just came out yesterday, I believe, that Liberal MPs are now mounting a new effort to oust Trudeau.
Yeah, I saw that.
And so, like, who knows? Maybe there is some rational. Like, I mean, it's not few. It's definitely never nobody in that tight circle, that Chrystia Freeland, Trudeau, that Christina Gould, she's fucking insane.
Yeah, Melanie
those,
Joly.
Like, Melanie Joly.
Yeah.
Those core liberals. Obviously, none of them are very logical or responsible.
Well, they're living in the world of
servants.
Power. That's it.
But who knows? Maybe there are some other people within the Liberal MPs. Like, we know this when it comes to political parties. There's people that aren't necessarily running as a MP for that party that still have a lot of sway within that party.
Oh,
right?
for sure. Like, look at Chrétien in the back.
Yeah.
Look at Obama in the back of the Dems. Like, yeah. These guys are steering the ship.
So it's like, who knows? Maybe there's those liberal power brokers behind the scenes that are like, we need to get this guy out of here if we want to still be able to push this party.
Well, here's the way I see this. So you look at the United States, right? You think, okay, the United States, the president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world at this point, and they have control over trillions of dollars. It is you talk about power, that's the one everybody wants. So that's why there's so much corruption around it, right? Now, Canada's like this very, very small version of the same thing with no real power on the global stage, really. So if you want power globally, you can't really get it through Canada, and Trudeau's put us in a bit of a tough spot. Now, you do have access to a ton of capital, for sure. So you see why things happen down in the States that aren't happening here. And what I'm saying is, look what they're doing to hang on to power in the United States. It's pretty insane. But here, and they made Joe Biden step aside. That was definitely the people that run the party. There were some theories about it that Obama was involved, but whatever. But here, they've let Trudeau run the party into the ground. The Liberals rank third or fourth, depending on the polls you're looking at right now. They've embarrassed us on the global stage. The Liberals are in such dire situation. You and I thought at one point they might just merge with the NDP. You know what I mean? So that's what they've allowed the party to do. So my point is, if there are people behind Trudeau that are going to be the influential liberals that are not in power, why haven't they already pulled the ripcord on this guy to try to save the party? Because it could be in a comfortable second place right now and maybe stop the Conservatives from a majority had they done that at the right time. So I'm wondering if they actually have that much influence over politics here. Like what I'm saying, does the same system exist here as it does in the States? I don't think it does quite the same way. That's kind of my feeling. So here's my thought as we've been just discussing this. If Trudeau can limit the amount of information that is released to other MPs and to the public to save himself, he will, and no one will be able to stop it within the party. The party will only turn on him if enough information has to be released. And what I mean by this is from the AG, the RCMP, and anything he can't qualify as national security. If those things, if you can't use those tools to suppress information, to at least make you question how corrupt it is, and at least put him in a position where he can skew it in the media like he always does. If he doesn't give himself that opportunity, I see it. But what he has proven every time is that he finds a way.
Yeah. It is crazy that even with the information we have out there right now, he's been able to hold on to power, because you look at certain countries like the UK, which has a very similar system to ours. They just whip through their leaders as soon as there's anything resembling a scandal.
Yeah.
I mean, Boris Johnson got ousted because he was partying during lockdowns. Essentially, that was like the big crux of the issue.
Yeah.
Obviously, he had some other
but that's what it was.
Issues,
that's what it was. Yeah,
that was the trigger.
Liz Truss lasted less than the length of a head
days.
Of lettuce or something. Yeah, like I was like, that's some funny UK shit.
But then you think about like the scandals that have happened in Canada. You're like, this isn't just enough to get somebody to leave office. This should be enough to put many people behind bars.
Exactly. Yeah. Like Sunak's gone now. Starmer's he's a loose cannon. He might not last that long. Yeah, I agree. But it's also like, I think sometimes you look at the political apparatus, right? Like, so you look at the UK. They're stepping down every year right now, if not more. If you do, since COVID, it's once a year they're stepping down, regardless of whether some people last 4 weeks or not. So once a year. In Canada, when was the last time someone stepped down? Was it the Kim Campbell? Was that when it was? Like Chrétien Campbell era? I think that was the last time.
Before that, it would have been Trudeau Senior in the 80s.
Yeah, but then he came back.
Or late 70s.
Then he came back and ran a term anyway, because the other guy had just,
I
don't know what happened to the other guy. Yeah, so it was Mulroney, Campbell, Chrétien. It was in that era. Anyway, that's modern era, sure. So I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. When was the last time someone stepped down in the United States? Doesn't happen, right? You kill them or they
Nixon.
Don't. Yeah, so basically, it doesn't really happen unless there's they're going to die or they get killed or something. So that's not a part of their political sort of even conversation within society. They go, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm here. I have the power. In Canada, they don't really step down that often either. Over there, it's one of the tools they use quite frequently. So we just need to adopt that tool within our sort of Overton window or how we operate. And until we do, at least that way there's some accountability, because at least the person in power goes, if I do X, then I'm gone. Right. But here we just kind of go, they're like, what are you gonna do about it? I got a system to keep me in place and I control the media. Good luck.
100%. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got foreign diplomats in Canada will be briefed on quote-unquote acceptable activity ahead of the next election. Canada plans to brief foreign diplomats on acceptable diplomatic activity ahead of the next general election to prevent foreign interference. David Morrison, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, stated that Global Affairs Canada will clarify the boundaries between legitimate influence and unacceptable meddling. However, critics doubt the effectiveness of such briefings, especially against nations like China or Russia, known for covert tactics. While this effort aims to protect Canada's political process, enforcing boundaries remains challenging. The initiative to educate MPs on interference risks may also be insufficient without stronger measures, leading to concerns the strategy is symbolic rather than substantive. How effective is a diplomatic briefing in deterring foreign interference, especially from countries like China or Russia?
It's nothing but lip service, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you have MPs that knowingly participated in treason, because that's what it is. So you already know what you did to maintain power.
The former CSIS director has stated that as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm running on that guy. Is that we know that, we don't know how many, but we know double digits, Liberal MPs, we know participated in treason to maintain power in the election.
That was just in the Toronto area, by the way.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it was over a dozen in Toronto, and I think it was more in BC actually on the West Coast. So I think you could argue it's like 25 to 30. But again, I don't have enough. There's not enough proof there, but that's what it looks like it is. So these people knowingly did this, right? So if you knowingly break the law and then someone explains the law to you, how does that change your course of action in any way, shape, or form, especially if you're compromised? We know when we were talking to Sam Cooper that a lot of these people go to these, which is so stupid to me. So they go to these illegal gambling houses that are run by China and participate in prostitution and XYZ, and they're all videotaped. It's a very Diddy-esque situation. Cool. So even if you didn't want to participate, many of them are going to have to anyway. Now, I imagine that the Chinese and India and anybody else that's involved see the writing on the wall. They go, well, the liberals have no chance anymore at this point. So we're probably going to backpedal here. So you may not see as much foreign interference because I don't think they can swing this election in that same fashion, but they might just redirect their efforts to conservatives or whoever else they feel like they need to get into bed with to maintain their power structure. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But ultimately, look, at the end of the day, telling people that you're doing something wrong and explaining the law to them is going to do nothing whatsoever. What you need to do is you need to immediately increase the penalties that these people suffer for treason, and you need to enforce them, like full stop. You know what I mean? Like throw someone in jail for 10, 20 years. Like you said before, make them go live in a forest and take all their goods. Like you don't have a house anymore. We're taking all your stuff. I don't know, whatever it is. Look, until the penalty is severe enough, and until these people have to sort of face the music, nothing's going to change. You know, like I said, explaining to them what's acceptable and what's not, bullshit.
Yeah, it's hilarious to think about. It's like that's like the equivalent of, I think about those like public service messages about, say, domestic violence or something like that. Obviously, domestic violence is bad, but the idea that somebody that beats their wife just watches the TV and then sees domestic violence thing and is like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. Like, Same thing here when it comes to foreign interference. It's like, these people know when they're doing it that they shouldn't be doing it. The idea that you can just bring them into a briefing room and be like, hey guys, you shouldn't be doing foreign interference, and then being like, oh, you got it, man. Whoa, I didn't think of that.
It's like they're 4-year-olds. Like, oh, I didn't know I shouldn't throw sand in his face. Well, now I get it. Okay, I hurt his feelings. I understand. Got it. Yeah. Look, the other thing that I saw here too was we have an integrity commission. Now, I have an issue with the whole integrity commission because it's a liberal appointed integrity commissioner. It's fine, but there's
zero integrity.
Yeah, well, what's interesting actually is they're severely underfunded. They're at a point where they're like, hey, we need way more money to just deal with all the corruption and all the issues that we're having in this country. And it's all because of all the misconduct from liberal MPs right now. So even their own people are like, hey man, this is getting out of hand, but they're not giving them the resources to manage it effectively, right? So, I mean, again, it kind of goes back to this. You need an integrity commission, which is sad, but you need it. That's what we need in this day and age. It can't be a liberal. It can't be a liberal appointed individual by any means. It's got to be from opposing parties. You have no other choice. You got to do it that way. And then we got to go back to my thing before. Implement significantly harsher penalties. Then we can get this solved. Until you do those things, nothing's going to change.
The irony is hilarious too of even just the federal government being like, hey, there's so much government misconduct and so many whistleblower cases coming forward that we can't deal with them. And so we need more money. That thought where it's like, hey, we are using your money improperly, stealing it, and we need more of your money to deal with this. You're like,
what?
Yeah. Like,
I don't even understand how does the system even work that way? How do you even get away with that shit? That's what I mean. The Canadian government's got it figured out how to be as corrupt as hell. They have it figured out.
It's just government in general. This is the structure of government. Yes.
It's just you and I know this one rather intimately. Yeah. So I look at it and go, oh, you sneaky fucks. Jesus.
Like, even actually, you brought up Sam Cooper. One of the things that he's been highlighting earlier this week was insane. So he wrote a whole article about it on his Substack, The Bureau. But a recent investigation reveals that Liberal Party power broker Michael Chan allegedly influenced the Prime Minister's office to replace a sitting MP ahead of the 2019 election, raising concerns of foreign interference. CSIS labeled this as a major counterintelligence threat, but a warrant related to the case was delayed for 54 days in Public Safety Minister Bill Blair's office. Sources suggest Blair's hesitancy stemmed from Chan's significant role as a Liberal fundraiser. The delay frustrated CSIS and prompted interest from the U.S. intelligence community. The Hogue Commission continues to investigate these allegations, with Trudeau's testimony forthcoming. So you have CSIS and law enforcement becoming aware that Michael Chan, this guy who's openly works with Chinese interests, pressuring the Trudeau government to swap out MPs that are more
favorable to the regime,
to China. And then, you've got that warrant just sitting there. Like Bill Blair definitely held that back.
100%. 54 days. And what else that guy got going on?
No chance. He testified. He was like, "Oh, I signed that within hours of when it came across my desk." And then they found out that it actually sat on his desk for 54 days. So it's like you guys are actually doing everything you can to cover up for foreign interference. So at this point, it's not you can't even just take the idea that this stuff just happens, because foreign interference across the board is an issue no matter the party. We've even seen, say, India was playing with the conservative leader, like back when Pierre Poilievre was running for leadership of Conservative Party. There was interference there. But that was more like, and this still should be dealt with, but that was more just like, okay, we are from India funding these things. It wasn't like handshaking between the Conservative Party and India to get things done. As far as we know,
they had their own interests.
This is like,
that's tough to tackle.
This is like, you've got CCP handlers in the Liberal Party. This is completely different.
Yeah, when you got people compromised and you have handlers and people knowingly doing things, there's definitely a certain amount, like, I think that you have to accept the fact that there are people that are always going to try to influence elections because we have immigration, and like this, that's just how it's going to work. At the end of the day, that's how things are going to go. Now, what exists? What tools exist for them to be able to do what they want without, say, a sitting MP being involved? Those are things that are really, really hard to tackle. And I think as a society, we have to accept that. I actually do, whether it's Liberal, Conservative, NDP, I don't care, because how could you possibly I guess you could put together a task force, but at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to stop a community from voting together. You see it in across religions. You know what I mean? That's how these things work. And I just don't know what you can do to slow that down. And at the end of the day, I don't even think it's something you try to tackle. It's when these people are involved, whether they're compromised, whether they're doing it knowingly, without being compromised because they want to maintain power, whatever that is, those are the people that you have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
So it's...
And there's the cultural aspect to this as well, because I was thinking about, I just did a rant a day or two ago about how crime has infiltrated Canada, organized crime, like a lot of these people, even that we're just mentioning, who are in with the Liberal Party here, and those the illegal casinos that all operate in Canada, the head of that Chinese narco group that lived in Canada, all of this kind of stuff. People will make it about race because it's China. Like, even, say, the Liberals will call people like Sam Cooper for his reporting racist because he covers Chinese interference, right? But
it's funny, though, because not one conservative would call him racist, right? Because it just shows you the motivation.
But what I was thinking was, this seems to be an issue no matter the demographics that immigrate in large quantities.
That's what I'm saying. So, you can't do anything about it.
Even think back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? It was the Italian mafia. It was the Irish mafia.
Yeah, for sure.
So you would see these groups come over here, but the largest part is that those groups and those cultures were thought to be needed to assimilate. And they eventually did. And it took a process. But the difference is we expected those people to. The difference here is that we're like, no, you don't need to assimilate. Just we'll worship your culture.
Well, there's a couple other things that come into play here. First of all, that's a good point to make when you think about the immigrants that came in the 70s and voted for Trudeau, because you still see those same immigrants, Portuguese, Italians. I'm Italian. They vote for Trudeau no matter what, right? Because of the immigration, because Papa Trudeau got them here, even though they're voting for his son, who's a complete mental case. But that's how it stays, right? So you do see these blocks of voters that are foreigners, and Trudeau was doing the same thing, bringing them in for the votes. It's exactly what he was doing. So you see the same thing now, like in Mississauga. If you want I'll just blanket it. If you want to be the mayor in Mississauga, and I have a pretty intimate knowledge of this, you have to get the Indian vote. Like East, like you have to get their vote, or you have no chance anymore. Because think about it. If you're in Brampton, bottom line, like it's the most. There was a statistic that came up the other day. It's like the most foreign-born people in any country, in any city in North America, are in Brampton. If you want to be the mayor there or be in politics, you kind of know what culture you have to be a part of, right? And what you were saying with people assimilating to culture, well, there's a commonality in European culture and Canadian culture. I mean, at the end of the day, we were still under British rule for many years, right? So there's a significant crossover there. But when you look at the Chinese culture, I have no issues with it. I don't love the civil rights, but like they don't have the same culture. We can all get along, but they don't have the same culture. So you're not going to see that kind of assimilation. And then when you go with any of the Muslim cultures, they're directly opposed. So it's not even if you want them to assimilate, they're not even going to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen. Their goal, and again, this is a blanket statement. This is not every individual by any means, but I've seen enough of these things pop up online where they're like, at least a subset of Muslims in Canada are like, we're going to win through population density. We're going to bring more of our people here, and eventually we're going to take this over.
Even if that's not a conscious goal, it's what happens.
Well, it's exactly what is going to happen at some point, no matter what you do about it, right? So I agree. I mean, to your point, these are things you really can't do anything about it. That's just it's basically just understanding immigration, right? But when it's infiltrated the party, and these people are doing it knowingly, you need significant penalties to curb this.
Yeah, 100%. Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Parks Canada turned down fire trucks while Jasper burned. Parks Canada is under scrutiny for its management of the Jasper National Park wildfire, which destroyed 1/3 of the town and 32,000 hectares of forest. The agency rejected help from Arctic Fire Safety Services, or AFSS, which offered 20 fire trucks and 50 firefighters. Parks Canada cited legal restrictions preventing AFSS from fighting the fire. Additionally, the town's fire hydrants were incompatible with standard equipment, further complicating the response. Criticism has grown over Parks Canada's failure to address fire hazards like deadwood and provide clear prevention strategies despite warnings. Minister Stephen Guilbeault blamed climate change for the wildfire's severity. How can the Liberal Party blame climate change for the Jasper wildfire with a straight face?
So this is actually pretty wild fire. When you look at a lot of this, have you ever dealt with a fire inspector?
No.
So I've dealt with a lot of them for the businesses that I've had. They can be strict and challenging to work with, or you got to pay them off. But that's how it is. It's one or the other, right? So if you've got incompatible fire hydrants for an entire city, what's happening here? That literally makes no sense with how that unit of people operate. That's crazy to me. Not to mention having incompatible fire hydrants. Like, you know, your fire department is called to issues all the time. Have there been no other fires in that area ever? No other house fires, no other reasons to use a hydrant? So that makes it sound like they definitely already knew. It wasn't a surprise when they got there. This should have been fixed long ago. That's insane to me. The other thing that this really does, here's the real truth here. This information is not going to go far. It's not going to get out. And this shows you the power of the media. This is why I always say that the government's most powerful tool is the media. It's
100%.
not a nuclear weapon. It's the media, because this is ridiculous that they're using this to promote climate change. And when you look at it, it's actually negligence, right? We know that they reduced the parks budget significantly by like 50% in the last 5 or 6 years or whatever it was. So the money that you would have used to clear the deadwood, which is causing the spread of these fires, has been taken out of the budget, even though government spending has doubled at the federal level under Trudeau. So you look at that and you go, okay, but they got to push this climate change narrative. And then we know that the fire hydrants are incompatible. And we know now that they were turning away a platoon of firefighters with fire trucks that could have made a significant difference here. This is intentional. This is 100% intentional.
Yeah, and just to let, again, this stat alone, this is the government's data, is that the number of wildfires is decreasing over the last couple decades, but yet the amount of area burned is increasing.
And
so
you
see
this.
You're like, you have less to deal with and it's getting worse. How is this possible?
If anything, as they double their spending budgets, this is an area that would have deserved it. I mean, I'm not for government spending, but this is an area that you would say, well, if your narrative is climate change and it's burning forests, well, you have to spend money there. You don't decrease funding. How obvious is this? But I talk to people like, love my dad. It's great, but he's bought in wholesale to this nonsense. He's at climate change and the hurricanes. And I'm like, here's some data. Nope, not looking at any of that because that does not comport with my narrative. All right, cool, man. We'll just leave it at that. So the media is running these stories and convincing these people that anybody that says the things you and I are saying, this is fringe and it's nonsense. So they're going to get away with it. So they can say it with a straight face because they know how the media works. They get away. Like I'm trying to figure this out. When you look at reality versus the media narrative, right? And this is why we do what we do. You need independent news because you need some truth. And I know you and I get it wrong sometimes, but our intention is always what's actually happening, right? So how much on average is the story skewed from reality through the liberal lens in today's Canada? I think it could be as high as 80%.
Oh yeah. That's
huge. Insane.
Yeah. And then, so this whole story, I think, just goes to something larger, and you can actually be it right to what's happening in the southern states, kind of like, I guess, southeast states right now with the hurricane, right? Where you see people constantly talking online about how FEMA isn't helping them at all. They're talking about how they don't have the budget. Meanwhile, they have the budget to fly migrants all around the country and house them and do this and that. But
they're sitting on $8.3 billion right now.
Right. So it's like, okay, you guys don't have, quote unquote, don't have the money to help your citizens who are in an environmental disaster.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have the money to send overseas and do this and blah, 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 blah. But going to the same thing with them, like they get in the way. It's not just that they're incapable of solving it themselves. It's that they stop the people who are capable of actually helping it. And you see the same reports that are happening in the States where everybody that's talking about, okay, this person really made a big difference, is you see like neighbors and communities, they're helping build bridges in these like back forest areas for where roads have gone down. It's like the government isn't doing this for them. The vast majority of the help is coming from just individuals helping individuals.
Of course.
And it's the same thing here. So that Arctic Fire Safety Services is actually a private wildfire fighting service.
Yeah.
So you have private sector people that are sitting here being like, hey, you know what, don't even worry about the cost right now. We just need to deal with this problem.
Yes.
And they're like, nope, get away. And the whole cover story for that was that certain firefighting outlets aren't equipped to fight certain areas. So like, for instance, certain buildings, if they're on fire, essentially you need a different code because asbestos and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And you need different equipment and
Got
whatever. But this goes to my idea with like, okay, those individuals might be putting themselves in harm's way to deal with that problem and to help their fellow neighbors. But if they're willing to take that that risk, and because they feel it's necessary, why can't they? Like, to me, I'm like, why can't they? We need people that are willing to sacrifice for, we say the greater good. I hate that term usually. But if individuals are willing,
not used properly.
I don't think anybody should be compelled to do that. I don't think anybody should say, hey, you have to go in there and potentially make yourself sick with asbestos and all of that kind of stuff. But if somebody is willing to do that to help people that are in a worse scenario than they currently are, I'm like, why? Yeah.
I'm on the exact same page. It frustrates the hell out of me. And I think with the greater good comment, just for a moment, is there is the right and the wrong way to use this. If I could sacrifice myself to save people I care about, that's to me is the greater good, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I don't care. But for you to tell me that I have to take experimental medication when if it worked for you, why the fuck should I have to take it?
Yeah.
Logic me that. There is no logic for it. But then I'm the problem because I'm not doing it. So don't misuse that because it's a heroic term that's been abused. That to me is an issue. And I hate the liberals for doing that over the last 5 years. Anyway, when it comes to this, you see the same thing in the States too. And they're basically running these misinformation campaigns. Like, oh, there's all this dangerous FEMA misinformation. How is it dangerous? How is it dangerous to say they're not doing this? If FEMA is doing it, show me that they're doing it. Yeah. Show me how. Just beat the ideas with better ideas. Show me how they're doing it. But you're seeing the same thing now with the hurricane. Like Harris is saying that DeSantis should be doing what she needs him to do. And he got on the news the other day and just ripped her apart. He's like, Harris has never done any. Harris and Biden, they stay out of our way. I deal with these. This is when these natural disasters happen, I deal with them. We get resources from where we need them from, and I execute. Now she's just trying to campaign. She needs to stay the hell out of the way and shut up. She's never had anything to do with these things. So at least down there, you kind of get that the opposition here, right? But in Canada, you don't get that opportunity.
You get a little bit of that.
You're getting more of it.
Smith is pushing back.
You're getting more of it, but it's like, I would suggest it's like
Yeah, I agree.
25% is much. But also you look at like the media. So that DeSantis statement all over the news, right? In Florida and in channels you and I are going to see. And not because there's equal representation, but there's adequate representation down there in the news, right? So if you are Republican, 25% of it is Republican. You can see what you want to see. In Canada, we don't have it. So if she comes out there guns a-blazing, what are they going to do? They're going to chop it up. They're going to make it shorter. They're going to CTV it all of a sudden. It doesn't, you know what I mean? So we can't even get that same message out again because they control the media. So I think it's just to me, it kind of all funnels back to that, which is a huge problem for Canadians.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canadian universities are going DEI insane. Both the University of Ottawa and Toronto Metropolitan University are prioritizing diversity in their admissions process. The University of Ottawa's clinical psychology doctoral program will reserve up to 67% of its initial offers for non-white applicants, emphasizing lived experiences over traditional merit-based metrics. Meanwhile, Toronto Metropolitan University's new medical school will prioritize Black, Indigenous, LGBT, and other equity-deserving groups, removing the MCAT requirement in favor of a holistic admissions process. Both universities aim to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion by shifting away from traditional criteria in favor of increasing representation in their programs. So, is it possible to have DEI and high academic standards?
I guess ultimately you sort of could. You could focus on DEI and have relatively high academic standards, but you'll never be the highest. You'll never just focus on the best. You can't be merit-based and have DEI, right? So you could still have people that do have to pass the MCATs, and you could still have people that have a very high IQ and perform well and focus on DEI. I totally disagree with it. But technically you could. But I don't think like your capacity would ever hit higher than 80% of what you could be if you just focused on merit-based alone, which is how the world should run. This is, to me, and now that was to your question specifically, is it possible? In a sense, there's a way to get at least 80% of the way there, right? But we've gone to this point now where they're focusing on DEI so much that they're not only doing this, prioritizing DEI over merit, they're getting rid of the qualifications you actually need to do these jobs, like the MCATs, which is insane. Like, you want people that work in the medical field that didn't have to pass any medical exams because they hit DEI quotas. Well, now we're in a very dangerous space. So what I was saying is, if you focused on DEI, but still had high qualification standards, I'm of the opinion you could get to 80%, 800 being the capacity for whatever this institution is, 80%. But if you cut out things like the MCATs and you tell people it has nothing to do with your education and more so like your lived experiences, now you're at 50% at best. So now you've got some serious issues when these people graduate, if they even have to do anything to graduate. So you could go down this line in a way that you could justify it to people, even though you and I would always fight it. But now they're at a point that this is just preposterous.
I don't think it's possible, because if you look at the E within DEI, with it being equity, that means same outcomes, right? So the only way to achieve that across the board, no matter what sector or what avenue you're looking at, is to pull back the people that excel. You can't, nobody has ever found out a way to actually push forward people that hold themselves back effectively.
Right, but my point,
on a mass scale.
I agree, but here's the thing with your equity statement. Everybody the same. So the thing with equity is it's the lowest common denominator, right? So if you still have high academic standards, you can bring everybody down to this 80% level, and that equals equity. That was kind of my point, because I agree with you, but if you still have high academic standards, it can you can make the argument. A bad one, but you can make the argument.
Yeah, you can make the argument. A lot of them do.
yeah. So what we're living in right now.
But if I was to say, let's say it's like weight loss, it's like you can't get, if somebody's 500 pounds, there's nothing you can do to physically make them lose the weight, short of maybe tossing them on a hamster wheel at like a gunpoint.
Yeah.
But you can't large scale across
harpoon them on an island.
You can't large scale across society make those people lose weight.
Right.
Because the impetus has to be on them to actually take the action, right? But if you want to make people gain weight, it would actually be quite easy. You could just put tariffs on gyms, make it more expensive for people to go to gyms, all of these kind of things.
Right.
you can actually get in the way of people doing that. And this is something that Brett Weinstein has even pointed out on like an evolutionary basis. He goes even down to the cell level. Even if you want to make cells operate similarly, you can only do it by infringing or impeding on the cells that excel. We don't know how to make these other ones better.
No, I agree. I mean, every time I look at DEI, I always say that you have to go to the lowest common denominator. That's all you can do. You just have to, who's the dumbest guy in the room? Because that's where you all have to operate within. That's the space you have to be in. And that's why I say, like, when you're throwing merit out the window completely, and you're throwing out standardized testing like the MCATs completely, well, now you bring it down to 50%. Obviously, this is a bit of a dummy equation, but you know what I mean. And that's kind of where these people all have to land now. So you graduate some sort of medical school, and by this case study, the lowest common denominator, you only have to know 50% of the stuff to get out. You're a danger to society now. That's not helpful. You're going to harm people.
Yeah, no, it's completely true. And this is something that Andrew Lobachowski pointed out. He was the Polish psychiatrist that lived through the communist revolution in Poland. And he was saying that aside from even just what these ideologues can do when they get into certain institutions and then weaponize those institutions against their supposed enemies or whoever they declare their enemies. For instance, the communists, it was against the bourgeoisie, the middle class, right? But above and beyond that, what also happens is you actually just you create a society that is so mediocre that it's dangerous because people aren't able to fulfill these things. So this is a good example, is like people will say, well, we're doing this to uplift impoverished communities, right? So what's worse for those people? Taking those people that aren't qualified for certain opportunities, and then in turn, a generation from now, the medical students that look, or the medical people that look over those communities are actually worse off, and they're not as competent. Or, you see this where, okay, maybe those people don't get those opportunities, but at least they have good help from the institutions that are competent. And so, like, to me, it ends up double fucking them in a sense.
Oh yeah, you're driving this off a cliff. Yeah, this just gets significantly worse over the next 20, 30 years. 100%. I mean, you look at a lot of these things, and I think you sort of have to go historical, and you see what happens and where we land and why we land there. And like, to your point, if this is the standard you're setting now, what does this do to the medical field in the future? You do need sort of mass adoption, like whatever. But I mean, you saw this actually happen at two schools pretty well back to back. The Ottawa, I think it was psychology, did the same thing. Yeah, it was psychology. So there's 67%. It's going to be first opportunities are going to be given to DEI candidates.
I also love how they're just out in the open now, not being like, oh, we're helping impoverished people. It's like non-whites.
Yes. Yeah, which is insane, right? Like it's weird to me. I don't care. I don't need those opportunities. My kids won't need those opportunities. So I don't feel personally affected by it in a sense. But this is racism. Like, I don't understand how people are looking at this going, no, it's just equality. We're just balancing the scales. No, guys, you're using racism. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
We were improving. Things were getting to a pretty good place. I mean, I don't think, I know racism exists and it always will and blah, 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 for sure. There's always shitty people out there. But society was moving in a much better direction before this DEI mob kind of jumped in here. And they're creating a larger divide, which for me just shows you this whole thing was just born out of political interest to create division. That's all this is, and that's all it's going to do. The problem is now, when it's penetrated the medical system, these have harmful long-term effects. This is no longer just some tool that's being used to rile up university kids. This is now in the medical field, and this is going to affect Canadians and the care that they receive over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, how many years because of this nonsense.
There's a good short story about this that just perfectly encapsulates the DEI nonsense. It's Harrison Bergeron by Kurt von Gutt. I don't know how to pronounce his last name properly, but anyways, he wrote this. It was like a dystopian short story. And he said, so here's just a little summary.
Vonnegut, I think it is.
Vonnegut, yeah. In a
space.
bleak future where the government has achieved total equality by handicapping anyone with exceptional abilities, George and Hazel Bergeron sit in front of their television. George, a man of above average intelligence, wears a device in his ears that emits sharp noises to prevent him from thinking too clearly. He also wears the weight of a heavy vest designed to suppress his strength. Hazel, of average intelligence, is spared by such burdens. On the TV, a news report interrupts with a breaking story. Their son, Harrison, has escaped from a prison. At just 14, Harrison is a towering figure, 7 feet tall, handsome, and gifted beyond measure. In this world, such exceptionalism is a crime, and Harrison has been fitted with the most extreme handicaps: chains, thick glasses to impair his vision, and a grotesque weight to suppress his strength. Suddenly, Harrison bursts into a television studio, tearing off his handicaps with ease. In an act of rebellion, he declares himself emperor and demands that the most beautiful ballerina, also shackled by handicaps, join him. He removes her from her burdens as well, and together they soar in a graceful dance, defying the laws of gravity and the government's enforced equality. But their moment of freedom is short-lived. The handicapper general, a cold and ruthless enforcer of equality, storms into the studio and kills Harrison and the ballerina with a shotgun. The broadcast cuts out, and George, whose ear device blocked out much of what has happened, is left with only a vague sense that something tragic occurred. Hazel, oblivious to the deeper meaning of it all, comforts him as the two continue watching television, unaware of the rebellion that flickered briefly and was extinguished. And it's like, that's obviously an overblown...
For sure.
But that's what any good story does, is it makes it so obvious that it's in your face. But it's like, that's what we're doing in a sense here with all this DEI junk.
I totally agree. It's insane.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got UN Pact for the Future draws concerns over CCP backing. Last week, the United Nations, backed by the Chinese Communist Party, adopted the Pact for the Future, expanding its influence over global governance. The Pact outlines 56 actions, including empowering international institutions, combating quote-unquote misinformation through a global digital compact, and phasing out fossil fuels. While UN officials praise it as a solution to global challenges, critics argue it undermines national sovereignty and promotes left-wing agendas. US lawmakers and grassroots leaders are concerned that the pact overlooks pressing issues like China's growing influence and could lead to more censorship and a reduction in freedoms. So, how might the Pact for the Future impact national sovereignty, particularly for countries wary of international governance?
So this is kind of nuts, actually. I was just putting together sort of a report on this, so I'll just go high level. So first thing is control over national sovereignty. So the idea here is you have to give up a lot more power to global governance. You have to sign into this. Well, they didn't sign this. This was just pushed through. So they had no choice, but now these countries are a part of it under the UN. Now the UN ultimately can't enforce these things, but I'm of the opinion countries use the UN as a smokescreen to enforce the types of things they want to, which is something they want to do here in Canada. So more global governance, data surveillance and privacy intrusion at scale and centralized to a global platform, centralized control of resources. Again, we saw this through the recent pandemic response treaty in Canada. So next on the list, financial control and economic manipulation. So this includes things like sustainability goals and carbon taxes, censorship of dissenting voices. Now, this is a big one. I always talk about how much control the government has because they control media, and this is not lost on them at scale. So now they have this sort of globalized plan to enforce all these misinformation, disinformation campaigns and censor all these tools. And you're seeing it with a lot of the egregious penalties that are being put on social media companies, because that's our most potent weapon that you and I and the citizens have. So that's on the list. Control over health systems. So standardizing their approach to pandemics, enforcing compliance, vaccination, stuff like that. It's actually pretty insane. Imposition of global taxation. So they want there to be global carbon taxes. They want there to be, they also want, like, they're doing this thing too, where they want to be charging multinational corporations a lot more taxes too within all these jurisdictions that they operate in, but using taxing global revenue. So it's this way of like controlling the corporations more. Like, the government's evil. It is. And I know large corporations can be too, but it's like you're watching the government try to swallow up these corporations because the government's like, hey, we could all work together here and we can be the sphere of influence more so than these corporations. That's what I'm seeing anyway.
And just one point I want to add there is that, like, when it comes to the evil between government and corporations, they often can have the same level of evil. I think the same psychopaths that find their way into government are the same ones that find their way successfully on Wall Street, all of this kind of stuff. But the difference is that no one business has nearly as much control over your life as a government institution.
Not even close.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. It's insane. And so next on the list is enforcement of cultural and social norms. So
This is about adhering to global standards on equality, diversity, and inclusion. Yes, great. Forced migration policies. We're seeing how that's working out. Not well. Mandatory climate action and land reallocation. Now, what's interesting about the land reallocation is almost 90%. This is insane. Almost 90% of Canada's land is owned by provincial or federal government already. And now they're talking about reallocating the land that we have in the name of climate change. Great. Got it. Next on the list, digital identification and digital governance. Now, this is enforcement of digital IDs nationally and globally. So centralized systems. When you're traveling, it's like, yeah, you have your passport, but it's tapped into the global system, right? So we know how all this stuff works out, and we've seen how this can work when they freeze bank accounts through the pandemic, right? And that's a microcosm. People see it like, oh, well, that's just an offshoot. No. If everything's done digitally like this, they can target individuals. They don't like what you and I are saying on social media, and the social media company's not doing a good enough job of shutting us down. Well, then our bank accounts are shut down. You can't leave the country. You can't get on a bus. Now you're in China. Not really, because you can't get on the bus, but you know what I mean. So next on the list, achieving net zero and economic repercussions for not following the protocols. Now, we already know achieving net zero is impossible. It's impossible. And we know the economic impacts are significant. And then there's a few more things that are sort of tied into global governance, like global redistribution of wealth, which I think's a weird one because the people that are powerful at the top want to keep it anyway. And then reforming the global financial system, which I think is sort of your reset situation. And then the last sort of chunk just has to do with more global governance, whether it's health or economics. They kind of tie all that in together and then try to give more people to the power at the top.
I was listening to Boris Johnson a little bit on Diary of a CEO. He just was on there this week, I think. And Stephen did a very good job of grilling him on the whole Brexit thing. Also some of the COVID measures as well. Like even just, it was refreshing to see an interviewer sit across somebody and be like, me and my friends weren't allowed to go to funerals. Do you understand what it's like watching you party with your friends while you're imposing those rules on us? Anyways, but getting into the Brexit thing, he was also grilling him about that and going, I don't hear you ever talking about the downsides. Like, what are the upsides? And I thought the one critique I guess I'd have of Stephen in that scenario was he didn't seem to really understand that like having choice, having autonomy is in and of itself a good. Like you don't need an entire amount of reports after that you can say why it's a good thing that you have choice. And that was essentially Boris Johnson's whole point with Brexit was like, look, when it comes to these things in the pandemic, like we saw now, the reason that Britain was able to get its hand on, say, PPE or these vaccines, whether you support that move or not, it still rings true to the principle, is that they were able to get that stuff quicker because they were able to make independent decisions that weren't burdened by EU regulations.
Yes, more red tape, more bureaucracy, more Jasper, Wildfire. You can't let the firefighters in, of course.
Exactly. So he was like, look, that allowed us to deal with it how we saw fit. But even aside from the whole COVID thing, like I think the most evil thing you can do to somebody is take away choice. Like at that point, they're a slave if they don't have choice within it. And so it's the same thing on a state level. If a country doesn't have the choice as to how it's going to govern itself, it's no longer free. And so like, how can you say that we're free under the Canadian banner if Canada is actually subservient to a higher global governance?
Well, you can. I mean, Trudeau's talked about being the first post-national country. And I mean, this is his game plan. I'm sure they had their hands in putting this together. A lot of it mirrors what I saw in the pandemic response plan as well, which is insane. It's insane that these things have anything to do with, global governance and managing your economics and digital ID. Like this fuck right off with all this nonsense. But this is where the liberal world order is going. That is the importance of voting conservative or Republican right now. Right now, again, I want to emphasize this. I don't think that Republicans or conservatives are always the solution, but right now they will drive us in the opposite direction of where the liberals are taking us at scale. And the importance of this is why, you see a lot of people saying, oh, this is the most important election in history. That sounds like hyperbole. And I think in a lot of cases, based on their knowledge, it is actually hyperbole. But if you know enough about what's going on the world stage and the direction that these countries are trying to drive us all at once towards this unified global government, it's actually not. So if you actually have a deeper knowledge of it, it does ring pretty true. we have a few years here to correct course on a few things. In Canada, it's government spending and it's immigration. If we do not, and maintaining some national identity. If we don't do those three things over the next 3 to 5 years, it is too late for this country until the world reorganizes its governance. I don't even know what that looks like. In the United States, I genuinely think that if Kamala Harris gets voted in and it's Democrat again, I think that they too are going to drive themselves in this direction. And I think that it's going to be a generation or more before they have sovereignty, or they're just going to split apart, which you may see happen, right? So, this future pact agreement sort of highlights or really confirms the suspicion that I have, because this is all complete nonsense. None of this is going to serve the people at scale. It's all about power and control over everybody.
I think when it comes to the most important election claims, what happens there is there's this really interesting theory called the fourth turning, which is that every 4 generations we come to a crisis point within our societies. And then it's kind of like there is a fork in the road as to which direction you can go. The historian who outlined this whole theory, he uses America as a basis, but he goes like, look, this almost happens perfectly in 80-year cycles, which is there was the first, which is the Revolutionary War. Then there was the Civil War over slavery. And then there was the whole World War II area and like the New Deal with FDR and all that. And now 80 years later after that, we're now in another crisis point. And so it's not that like this one election is the most important of all time. It's that these cycles, in these crisis points, those elections are undoubtedly more important than other times.
Yeah.
Because you look at it, obviously this wasn't an election cycle, but let's say it was the Civil War. If the Confederacy won, America would be a completely different country today. Like it would be an insanely different country. It wouldn't be the same country.
I guess you could say within this generation.
Yeah.
I guess that'd be a safer bet. Yeah.
So same thing with, I would even say it's the most important along multiple generations, because it is, we were getting to this point where it's like, okay, are we going towards internationalism and ceding national sovereignty to these global governing bodies, which is a very communist idea? Or are we going to maintain national sovereignty and push back against this
and individual
world?
Freedom and all that other stuff?
That's the main issue there that I see. But moving on to our last story, we've got Harris-Trump lean into final days of election campaign. So with under a month until election day, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are ramping up their campaigns in what is shaping up to be an unpredictable race. Following 2 assassination attempts on Trump and a change in the Democratic ticket, polling shows the contest is neck and neck. Trump dominates media attention, while Harris has a substantial ad spending advantage. Rural turnout is expected to favor Trump, while urban centers are key for Harris. Both candidates have gained cultural endorsements, and early voting is already underway, with mail-in ballots being distributed in several states. So who do you think will win the 2024 presidential election?
This is sort of a toss-up for me, right? So the Democrats are winning the media war, for sure. The Republicans seem to have more grassroots support. There was something I was listening to actually in a podcast. You look at these Trump rallies and there are 20, 30,000 people showing up to some of them. Sure, 10,000 here and there, but that's whatever. Now the Harris rallies, you're seeing like 2,000. But what was interesting about the Harris rallies is someone tracked data on cell phones, and it looked like 75% in a lot of these places, if there was 2,000 people that showed up, 75% were people that were traveling around with her like she's the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
Right? So some people had been to multiple rallies outside the state. Now maybe let's be charitable. Maybe she's just that great and people love her so much. When you kind of look at it, you go, fuck, if only 2,000 people showed up and 75% were from other rallies or other locations, only 500 people from that area supported her. It doesn't look like they have the grassroots support. It doesn't look like anybody, that's what I'm seeing. But again, they run the media. They kind of run the social media world. They have control over a lot of other tools. They have a larger budget. They're currently in power. I also think this is I guess it's kind of a bold statement, but there is definitely election fraud, a certain amount. I think everybody knows there's a certain amount. It's my opinion that they lead in that category pretty significantly. That's what I think as well. So I think you have to account for that, when you consider this. So you kind of take all of it into consideration. You go, okay, well, there's been 2 hurricanes and they had piss poor response to that as well. So that doesn't serve them. You kind of have to,
I think day by day it sort of changes. I hate to say it. Day by day, I don't know. And there are so many factors. I still think Trump's going to win, but I think it's going to be very close. What do you think?
I'm of the mind. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like, again, the guy's almost died twice in the last couple months. You look at all of this, like, I think Eric Weinstein is right when they say, like, I don't know if they'll let him be president.
Yes.
Like, this isn't a matter of whether he can win an election. It's whether the machine allows him to get in.
And that was why, that's when I'm talking about the manipulating voting and voter fraud. That's kind of what I'm talking about. It goes back to this idea of two separate types of democracy. The institutional democracy that one we were talking about before, which is global governance. And then there's democracy that you and I live in, like we have a choice. But if they want to maintain this institutional democracy, and Trump does not represent that. So if it were a moderate Republican, like just, I don't know, pick anyone you want. If it were a Bush, then maybe they go, oh, who cares? He's already a part of this. Let him win. Who gives a shit? Because the last time there was an attempt on a president's life, they won almost every state, I think except for 2. Now there's been 2 attempts on his life, and the media is like, it didn't even happen. We don't even, allegedly. So it's interesting. It's like the powers that be right now. So maybe I should reframe what I said. I'm not necessarily sure the Democrats control voting fraud more than the Republicans. It's the group on top that wants to maintain institutional democracy control it. And Trump's not a part of that group.
Yeah.
So I think they want to push back. That's why I think in this election, the advantage goes to the Democrats for the voter fraud side of things. That's probably a better way to put it.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that's important to note when it comes to the whole Trump versus Kamala popularity, because you were talking about turnout to these rallies, is like, I don't think we should ever underestimate how many of these people, it's not that they are insane fans and supporters of Kamala Harris, it's that they hate Trump. So there's not,
Yes.
so it's not necessarily that, I love Kamala Harris so much I'm going to go support her at one of her rallies. It's fuck Hitler, right?
Yeah.
Like, essentially.
Well, no, you make, so that kind of goes back to my point with the media. I was talking to my buddy Robin about it the other day, and it's kind of one of these things where they're using the media to create this anybody but Trump campaign, right? So that's what these people are. They're just voting against this guy because he's such a big problem. But it goes back to the thing of if it were a
As
moderate,
we were everybody for
yeah.
Trudeau.
but right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Trudeau's burned this country to the ground. So have the Democrats down in the States. But if you kind of look at it, if this had been a moderate Republican candidate, they couldn't have used this strategy.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have to stand on their policy and their agenda, which would really highlight the holes in their arsenal, the gaps in their arsenal. So it's interesting, right? Because Trump does not represent institutional democracy, and he would tear that down. So the institutions want him gone. And I think it's what's best for America right now and the West in general, right? And obviously America's the head of the snake. So I think that's why this makes sense. But if it had been a moderate Republican, they probably would have a better chance of winning. So it's kind of weird how it's shaking out anyway.
I think, actually, I watched Trump on Flagrant, Andrew Schultz's podcast.
I really like, yeah.
Man, hilarious.
Yeah.
He, like, I gotta say, I was madly impressed. He made me laugh more than most stand-up comedians over the last couple of years. Like,
Nice.
He was on fire in it. But one thing I realized throughout that interview is, because I don't listen to him in long form that often, but one of the things I realized through that interview is, like, I don't think he can be thought of as dangerous as many of these people think of him
course
as.
not.
The cult of personality around him could turn dangerous at some point. But Trump himself, I was thinking about this, he has no, like, ideology that's propelling
Dangerous.
him. He's
No,
not.
he
He's
doesn't.
not. He's
No.
not sitting here being like the Aryan blood or the capitalist system is oppressive. Like, he doesn't have these, whether it be Marxist or fascist ideas. He literally looks at everything through a business lens.
Yes.
And even when he gets down, he was talking about some of these leaders in foreign states, but it's like, okay, when we sit down, like, I'm looking at it like it's a business deal with these countries. I'm not thinking about things, like, he didn't say this outright, but, like, I'm not thinking about things ideologically. And so that to me is like, is a major.
There is no
key.
dangerous. This is what I mean. They're saying these crazy things like, well, when he gets in, he's never going to leave. He's never going to go, and he's going to change democracy forever, and we're not going to have any votes. He literally goes, guys, this is my last term no matter what. Like, I'm out after this. He's 77. What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Even Noah Yuval Harari said this on a podcast the other day. He actually changed my mind on a lot of things, so I'll give him credit. But this one thing he said, exactly what I'm kind of getting at, is he goes, well, what's dangerous in democracy these days is if you let this man in, he'll just never leave. You know what I mean? You kind of go, he's not even saying these things. He doesn't want that. That's not going to happen. He did make one stupid comment about it way back, but it was a throwaway comment and it was clearly a joke.
Well, the thing is that it wasn't even a joke. I think the one that people point to a lot is that how he says the Christians need to get out and vote because they historically have a low voter turnout, and how they need to show up in this election because it's so important and to vote for him, and that if they do, he'll never have to vote again. They'll never have to vote again. Well, the Democrats took that and spun it as, well, he's going to take away our democracy. But if you listen to the whole speech after where they cut it in those media outlets, is that right after that, he goes on to talk about how the country, like, I'll fix the things, and whether he can or not, that's another thing. But his point is that I'll fix the country. Things will be running so well that the next election after this one won't even be significant. Because the issues will have been solved to such a great degree. Yeah.
But so, what they do is they grab a sound bite, they manipulate it, and then all of a sudden you've got this fascist Nazi who wants to run the world and burn everything to the ground.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, well, anyway, at the end of the day, I hope that he wins, not because I'm a huge supporter. Actually, I'm becoming a bigger fan of the guy, to be honest with you.
After that flagrant episode, I was like,
but anyway, look, for me, when I think about politics, it's all about correcting course. Yeah. That's how I always see things, and I think that's the solution they need right now, so I hope that he does win.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can support the show, get access to original articles, exclusive Substack podcasts, and a direct line to Jonathan and myself. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.